Mandate, M-A-N-D-A-T-E. Doesn't mean you're going to date a man, or a man date a man, or a woman date a woman, or who knows what. Doesn't mean that. Mandate is basically what every political party in power claims that they have at the end of an election. I don't think many Australians really understand the nature of representative democracy. If you look at the human being, representative democracy, as far as democracy is concerned, is basically the two-cell stage of a human being. It is a very rudimentary type of democracy that we've had in this country since Federation in 1901. Now, parliamentary democracy or representative democracy is based on the concept that when you vote, the government which is formed has the power outside constitutional limitations to pass any legislation it likes regarding any field of human endeavour which it thinks it can get away with. And it doesn't have to go back to the electorate. It didn't have to make it as part of their election campaign. So governments do have mandates because of the nature of representative democracy, and that mandate is to make laws. Now, laws are based on three things: habit, custom, culture, and class. And when most academics talk about law, they forget the class. And the state has always had a monopoly on making laws. And Parliament is the instrument by which laws are made for the state. In a society like Australia, where we have few constitutional protections for the individual against the arbitrary exercise of state power, and where there is no constitutional protection, as we're seeing, regarding freedom of speech, freedom of assembly and freedom of association, Parliament can and does pass legislation which strips away rights that we think we were born with, which we're not. So governments have a huge mandate. If they've got a majority in both houses of Parliament, both House of Representatives and the Senate, they can pass any legislation they like, which is not curtailed by limitations which are included in the Australian Constitution. And unfortunately, there are few limitations. It was found over a decade ago in the High Court of Australia that Australia could legally detain asylum seekers and refugees for life, legally. End of story. So let's get back to parliamentary democracy. Now, I think at the growing levels of disillusionment of parliamentary democracy, where less than 50% of people actually vote in the United States of America, where fewer people are voting in Australia, is directly related to the fact that people do not believe that Parliament represents their interests, and their parliamentary representatives do not represent their interests. Now, most parliamentary representatives in this country belong to major political parties. The parliamentary representatives' first responsibility is to the political party that pre-selects them for that seat. Their second responsibility is to the electorate. The electorate has no real power over a representative. A representative can actually change their mind about any issue they like, and even change the political party they belong to, and they still remain a representative till the end of their 3-year term. When the electorate goes through the motions of electing a new representative and giving a new signed blank cheque to a new representative to make decisions for them. So 2 reforms, and I think it's a bit funny that I'm introducing reforms which should be spoken about, which nobody speaks about. 2 reforms which could be introduced to make parliamentary democracy, drag it into the 21st century, are: 1, citizens-initiated referendums. In Australia, the only people who can change the Constitution and put a question to the people in a referendum is both houses of Parliament. You need a majority in both houses of Parliament to put a question to the people. The people cannot raise any issues. With citizens-initiated referendums, say 10% of people sign a petition within a 30-day period, like in Switzerland, that question then has to be put to the people, and the people make a decision on that particular question. For example, the question of a basic income, universal basic income, was put to the Swiss people 12 months ago. They lost, but it actually was put to the Swiss people, and 35% voted for the universal basic income. Here in Australia, It's only Parliament that can put questions to the people in a referendum. So citizens-initiated referendum is one way of refreshing parliamentary democracy. A second way of making representatives responsible to the electorate is by the power of recall. What that means in plain English is save 10% of the electorate during a term in Parliament of a particular individual, feel that that individual is not living up to their promise. If they call for a fresh election in that electorate, then that fresh election has to be held. If that person is re-elected, then no further elections can be held till the next election. So the power of recall puts power back in the hands of the people who elect the representative, because they have the power to get rid of that representative if they feel they are not meeting their needs. Today, I could sit on my ass for 3 years, collect my pay, turn up occasionally to Parliament and do nothing for the electorate and enjoy myself. There's nothing you or anybody else could do. Not that I'd ever be elected. Now, so parliamentary democracy is not the only form of democracy. You can have direct democracy, consensual democracy, and the list goes on and on. I won't explain that on this program. I've done that on other YouTube presentations. But the dilemma in the 21st century is we need a system of government which is able to improve people's living standards. The dilemma of when you live in a country where the economy is dominated by non-elected representatives, by non-elected corporations, where we have more and more duopolies and monopolies being formed because of the nature of capitalism, which promotes the formation of corporations, we have now reached a situation where we are having major social issues in this country. I know I keep saying we're only 24.2 million people living on a continent, but we are. We should not have major social issues in this country. We should be able to resolve the problems which we face, everybody faces on a day-to-day basis, because if we can't do it, 24.2 million people living on a mineral-rich continent, who else is able to do it? So we have that potential. Now we have a number of problems that we need to face as a community. Now it's not just about giving a mandate. The biggest problem we have is the question of participation. Most Australians are quite happy to wait for the election cycle to come full circle, then go out and grudgingly cast a ballot for a representative. Most Australians are not willing to actually come out on the streets to take up important issues. Most Australians are quite happy to sit back and wait. I think for a majority of reasons. I think a lot of people still think you can't fight City Hall. You can fight City Hall, and you can get City Hall, you can get the government to change its agenda. Because in a parliamentary democracy, unlike a dictatorship, the representatives have to listen to the people. Even a dictatorship, as we've seen in Sudan recently, where a dictator of 30 years, al-Bashir, was thrown out by popular protest, dictators can be removed from power. So if we tend not to be active and participate in day-to-day life and just basically act as cringing, carping consumers, not citizens of this country who've got a stake in this country, well, things will grind on as they are. And what we are seeing today is the major political parties being taken over by small groups of people who have specific agendas, whether it's a religious agenda, whether it's a corporate agenda, whether it's a racist agenda, and most Australians are sitting back. And I find it quite ironical that conservative forces are talking about the quiet Australians, because the quiet Australians are the problem. All those people who think that all you've got to do is wait and vote every 3 years are the problem. Democracy is about participation, not just in the electoral process, but participation on a daily basis in the way society functions. And if that means signing a petition or being involved in a protest or forming a ginger group or raising issues with your local politician or trying to create a mass movement, say, for public housing, that's what participation is about. That is what changes habit and custom and culture, as we've seen in this country over the last 50 years, where there have been huge strides made in issue-orientated politics, but no strides, not one stride being made in terms of, one, improving people's living standards, and two, improving people's ability to participate in the governing process. We are still back in 1901. There have been no major constitutional changes regarding the governing processes in this country. And week after week and year after year, we see the same old faces dominate the political, social and cultural agenda. We've got to the situation now where threat of the press is an issue. We've got the situation where entrenched poverty is an issue. We've got to the situation where militarisation has become an issue. We've got to the situation where the domination of the economy by a shrinking number of corporations is becoming an issue. And it's felt most acutely in regional Australia and in small business. And the tragedy is that most people living in regional Australia and small business don't see that the problems are directly related to the power that is exercised by unaccountable corporations whose major responsibility is to create ever-increasing profits for their major shareholders, irrespective of the human, social, environmental costs. They don't see that. They think that somehow it's the government that's at fault, or the opposition that's at fault, that there are no jobs in regional areas, but there are no jobs in regional areas because of capitalism, in a period where labour is no longer needed, is not going to create jobs in the regional area, and governments are not able to create jobs in the regional area. So we should be looking at expanding the economy. It's very simple. You've got public sector jobs, you've got private jobs. Why not collectives and cooperatives? Now, collectives and cooperatives can form a very significant part of the economy. They can provide employment to people, gainful employment, producing products and services which are important. But the trouble is, you go to a bank and ask for some seeding funding for a cooperative and collective and you'll be shown the door. Why shouldn't 1% of the $1 trillion, which is now in superannuation funds, be earmarked to act as seeding funding for cooperatives and collectives? Because you could form cooperatives and collectives in the small business sector. You could form them in regional Australia. You could form them in urban areas, and you could actually create a new segment of the economy which is actually based on the satisfaction of human needs, not creating profits for profit's sake. So, as I keep saying in these YouTube presentations, I can talk all I can. The reality is, ultimately, what happens will be determined by you. You can be a consumer or you can be an active citizen. I encourage you to think about the possibility of becoming an active citizen. It's only active citizens and residents which change the direction of society. Power in a democracy ultimately resides in the hands of the people. It doesn't reside in the bureaucracy, the state or the government of the day. It resides in the hands of an active, not a passive population.